But when I react in anger, nothing good comes of it. For us to hope that our kids have all of our best qualities, but none of the bad ones, is absolutely absurd. It was also helpful to have somebody to run my best ideas of parenting by before I used those best ideas and screwed everything up.
All right. I am here with one of my favorite dads, Mike. Will you please introduce yourself?
I am Mike Knittel, and I'm a great dad, and I'm here to share some wisdom today.
That's right. Let's roll. Okay, let's start with tell me about your kids.
Well, I have a lot of them. They're 19 through 31 now. Cassie and I have a blended family. The two youngest are boys, mine, and then the three oldest are hers. But they're really all of our kids. And then we've got the two grandsons that are living with us, who are 6 and 3, Walker and Memphis. So finally, a chance to actually do parenting right after screwing all our children up. So
right, that's right. That's that's a good way of saying it. Like, that would be really cool if this conversation helped people become grandparents the first time, like as the good version the first time around.
Well, I like to refer to my children as my experiments, right? Like, oh wow, like I didn't screw you up and you turned out great. And so, having made so many mistakes as a father, I seem to be really good at not making the same ones with the grandsons and doing a little better job.
That's awesome. Well, so that, one of the questions that I'm curious about is, the nature versus nurture conversation. Like you said, like you could really screw up and the kids can also turn out fine, or you could probably also do things really, really well and the kids could probably turn out to be screw up. So what's your, observation of all of your fathering experience about the difference between nature and nurture with your kids?
Yeah, and excellent. I mean, I really like that question. And I think one of the things that we take too much responsibility for, especially when our kids, grow up, is that somehow this was my fault, right? Or somehow that all their successes are because of me. And the reality is kids are a function of so many different inputs, whether it's their friends or the other parents or their grandparents, and the piece that I look at, nature versus nurture. I think I'm falling squarely on the sides of nurture, because I can see such a difference in the relationship that I had with all of our kids once I got sober versus before. And so when I was really able to be present and approach them with love rather than being, two sheets to the wind, shocker, like, my relationships improved and it seemed like the quality of the kids' lives did as well.
Yeah, we definitely have a direct impact on them. How we show up matters. And I think that's a really important part of stepping into being the kind of father you really want to be. You've already opened up the can on the conversation about your sobriety and your journey around that. And I know that's really overlaid your experience of being a dad. You've had different phases of that. So yeah, you want to just talk about, what that was like for you and what your takeaways were, what your observations were from all that.
Yeah. And what I love, right, is you've only known me sober. And so the majority of people in my life, are people that I've met since sobriety, because outside of my family, don't have a whole lot of relationships that predate that for obvious reasons. And so people like you are like, wow, my experience of Mike is he's really kind and, he's patient. And Cassie's like, oh shit, like, you didn't know the old Mike. And I'm like, yeah, the combat veterans, in the crew, are really able to see the difference. And look, I mean, there's so many pieces, but I think the greatest takeaway that I have with my journey in sobriety was as it related back to my own childhood. Because for years, even in my sobriety, I existed in victimhood and blame. If only my parents had given me the affirmation I so desperately desired, I wouldn't have then made these choices. And first of all, I've owned it from the start that it was my decision to abuse drugs. But the piece that really was a game changer was the ending of resentment, and really framing my parents in terms of really believing that they did the best with what they had. And for some perspective on that, right? My mother's father was the youngest man to make sergeant at San Quentin in the early 1950s. And my father's father passed away when he was 14. And so, probably not very easy childhoods. And the grandfather that I knew, that I revered and put up there, was a man that had many years to wisen and mature. And who knows what my mom's childhood was like. And then the other piece was um, really believing that even if I could unwind and go back and change my childhood and give me all the things that I would, and my life today would be the same with my kids, although that's impossible, I wouldn't have done it because it made me acutely aware of how to meet my kids, and to always make sure that they knew that my love for them was unconditional, that, as Cassie says, like we will always love you, but we won't always like you. And also using my sobriety as a real modeling tool, because it's 100% communication at our house. Like, everything is laid out. And that my kids grow up knowing that they don't have to try to be this perfect person, because they look at me and see the story of somebody that fell on his face, got back up, made choices, and changed who he was.
Yeah, I mean, that's a powerful lesson to learn as a kid, but also must kind of suck as a kid to go through, like, have to learn that. Like, what was it like, before you got sober, you being a dad, and like, what's different? Probably everything's different, but like, what's different since?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different stages to me that led me into celebrate recovery and nearly burning the family down, right? And for years, in many senses, I was a single dad. I raised the boys with my brother. Their mom was an active part of the picture. And in my mind, right, and in the probably the eyes of many others, I was doing a pretty good job of maintaining. But there are certain avenues of drug addiction that when you go down, there just aren't too many success stories out there. You hear lots of like Fortune 500 executives or alcoholics, they're addicted to cocaine, marijuana, whatever it is. But methamphetamines and heroin just don't wind up being two that are commonly referenced. And it only took me 3 months of heroin abuse to completely light my family on fire, and led me to the point where, Cass left with her daughters. Was that my wake up call? Of course not. Mine was when CPS knocked at the door and said they had a child endangerment complaint. And without belaboring that story too much, what was really interesting is that after I had a year sober, I actually wrote a thank you letter to CPS, because if they hadn't intervened and my sons hadn't been removed from the house, and obviously their mom took temporary full custody of them, I don't know if I'd be alive today.
Wow. Yeah. What was it like in the house before CPS came? Like, what do you recall?
Yeah, I mean, the part that I'm most grateful for in the healing aspect is that we heal through a lot of laughter and very dark humor. And so, me, most of my jokes are way off the cuff, and I'm really good at going 10,000 feet past the line. And so naturally, so are 4 out of 5 of our kids. And so, in a lot of respects, it's just the open joking about, do you remember the time that dad fell asleep face down in spaghetti at the table? Or do you remember the time that dad was convinced that he had gout? So he was soaking his feet in the bucket. And my brother was like, you do realize that a man only gets gout in one leg. And heroin had so screwed up my circulation that my body's, my lower extremities had swollen to about 2 times what they are right now. And so I would be soaking my feet in a bucket, and pass out, and then drop the remote control in the buckets again and again and again. And so there's only one way to really describe that short period, and it was chaos. The other piece, right, is I was using drugs to nuke my feelings. And so anytime I felt like a failure as, a father, as, a worker bee, as a partner, I just had never developed healthy coping mechanisms. And it would send me into this spiral where I was just ashamed and beating myself up. And the only, resource that I had in those feelings was escape. And that's where drugs came in. And obviously, when you've got drugs that are involved, your temper gets out of control. You say a bunch of horrible stuff. You're unreliable. Your quality of driving on the road goes down significantly. And so, yeah, I mean, when it came down to child endangerment with CPS, completely accurate.
So I know you've gotten clean, you've gotten sober. Sounds like your family has a good coping mechanism around it, and how it talks about it. But what did you do to clean it up with your kids?
The one thing that I loved was something that my therapist, Sarah, said, early on, and this was about 6 months into my sobriety, and I was still really grappling with shame, paralyzing anxiety. And, when you remove your coping mechanism, you feel everything. And that was pretty sucky, but it was really necessary. And so what she said was, my kids are incredibly resilient, maybe 10 times more resilient as adults. And especially when it comes to their parents, even kids in the worst of circumstances have this innate desire in their hearts to reconnect with their parents, no matter how young or how old they are. But the best one to really talk about was my daughter, Madison, Cassie's youngest. Maddie and I, very similar in personality. She's very intelligent, very funny. And at 14 years old, this is before I burned everything down, called me out on my drug addiction. And we were upstairs, and she turned to me, and I still remember where I was. She was in the bathroom, fixing her hair or something. And she says, "Mike, you're fucking it all up. You have got to stop.
Wow.
This is too far." And I mean, it stopped me dead in my tracks. It wasn't enough to wake me up, but our relationship took the longest of all of the kids to heal. I remember, 7 months into my sobriety, right? I apologized, to her in person. I wrote her a letter of apology. And every time I would go over, because her mom and I started dating about 7 months, after I got sober again. And like the happy part of our story, right, is, as you know, but for people that are listening, is that 8 years later of sobriety, our family is completely back together again. The woman who fired me is my fiance, my best friend, my person, and like our life is really beautiful. But the part that was so hard was I couldn't repair with Madison. And my therapist again, said the reality is that when the majority of people apologize, they're doing it with their hand closed. And we've talked about this before, because what we're doing is we're apologizing and we're trying to grasp something back. I want somebody to say, "You're forgiven. Everything's all good." Right. And so my apologies really up to that point in my life were very selfish because I wanted something. And she said, especially with genuine apologies, they have to be done with your hand open so that somebody can take your apology and do with it whatever that they want. And from that point, whether they say immediately, "You're forgiven," or they come back later and say, "You're forgiven," or they never come back, that part is out of your control. The part that is in your control is your ability to make living amends to people through your actions and how you live your life. And so it was when I got my 1-year chip with Madison, I invited the whole family. I got up there, I spoke for a little bit, I cried. my family were all crying. And afterwards it just came to me, and I gave Maddie my 1 year chip, the first medal one I ever got. And when I look back, like, that was really the beginning of the healing started. And where Madison and I are in terms of our relationship now is in a really special place. But again, I had to accept that I needed to make a genuine, hands open apology.
I mean, that's a big thing, I think, for a father in general, for parenting in your relationship with your kids is, one, the ability to apologize, to genuinely take accountability for your actions. But I really like what you're saying. Like, it's an apology that doesn't come with any conditions. It's simply like, it's an expression of, I feel terrible for what I did.
Yeah.
And like, that's it. That requirement that like you get something back out of it, I can really see how that undermines the repair that's there to happen.
Well, and it's also one of those tendencies that we all have, which is to try to control it. That this is a structure where I give and you give. For me, it was learning, that what lay beneath the surface, right, of the iceberg of addiction, which is, here's the addiction, here's all the other character defects that lay in there. And it was control, selfishness, anger, all things I would go on to continue to work on to this day. And with my kids, especially now, like, I screw up all the time. And one of the things I really am proud of is that I have just gotten so much quicker and more authentic at being able to repair, because as humans, we screw things up. And we know that one of the hardest things in working with other adults or other interactions, whether, just friendships, is when people start to own their mistake and then they make an excuse. And so by me practicing, I own this is on me. And I'm going to, offer my apology.
Yeah.
That is what I want to model for my kids, because they too are going to screw up. And we already have millions of people in this world that have the excuses and the buts, and it was the other person's fault, rather than just saying, what was my part?
Look, I think it's a really good point, Mike. Like, as a parent, you are screwing up all the time. You're also not screwing up, all the time.
Sure.
It's not like you're constantly fucking up, but like there's opportunities to mess things up. And maybe on the surface, it looks like, what you went through might be a bigger screw up than anyone else, but like, it doesn't feel that way. Like, when you screw up as a parent, it's a really personal thing, but I know that in order to be able to apologize, like you're talking about, or repair, like you're talking about, like, you have to start with forgiveness for yourself. Because
Sure.
if you don't do that, then that need to get forgiveness from the other person is going to be the reason why you're actually doing the reparation or making the apology. So what was the work you've done or that you do ongoing to forgive yourself for being human and screwing up and not getting it perfectly, so that you can get back to being a great dad?
Yeah, I think that all of us are our own worst critic. And we've all got this narrative that's been going on in our head for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, depending on however however old we are. And other people's perception of us is often very different than our own perception. And your point is accurate that self-forgiveness is the most difficult one to achieve. And everything I'd done up until that point in my life was always results based. And this one is so much harder to quantify. And so one was, finding Celebrate Recovery and really diving into the recovery work, and having a group of men that I could be genuinely vulnerable around, but who would also hold me accountable. Two was, getting involved with my faith, because I was an atheist up until that point in my life. And so that was really a good source of truth, was, thinking that there is something bigger in this universe than just Mike. And I know it sounds dumb, but, like, in a lot of ways, like, it was poor victim me at the center of the universe. Now I'm like, I'm just a little tiny speck trying to do my best. And the third was, well, really, I guess this is the third. There's a fourth. The third was other community, right? People like yourself, Tony, people like, our friend Jennifer, people that are my clients that I was able to be honest and authentic about this stuff with, and who never judged me. Because one of the greatest fears that people have, especially when they've got like an ugly chapter in their life, is nobody outside of this circle of recovery can find out, because what will they think of me? And not once have I told this story to a ton of my clients, to my friends, family, everybody I come into contact with, because this is my story. Have I ever been judged or shunned? People are like, good for you. Because as we start to realize, right, in one respect, we're like, in my old world, I was all alone, and I was the only person carrying all these rocks: anxiety, judgment, shame, addiction. And then you realize everybody carries rocks, and nearly everybody in some form or another has been touched by addiction. And then the last piece was I got way more into reading, because, again, it was this epiphany that I had, which was all of my combined knowledge got me into a recovery group at 40 years old. So that must mean that all my combined knowledge was not so much. And so what would happen if I opened some pages of smart guys books, right? I'm not talking about biographies, but just really emotional, deep feeling authors, and just making that a part of my daily routine. So, and ever since then, it's just been kind of a combination of all four: the wash, rinse, and repeat. I don't have to come up with a formula, right? I've got my steps that I work through. I've got my accountability partners, my community, my faith in God, and books that really have all aided me in this journey. And then the last piece, just being really vulnerable about it. One of the pieces, right, is we're as sick as our secrets. That this is the major like head explosion moment for me has been, I didn't think recovery groups worked. I thought they were BS. I didn't think that therapists helped. I thought they were BS. And what my realization now is that the medicine is in the talking about it. Often people offer great insight that helps me in my way, but nothing cures me from what I did and who I was, like talking about it, being received, and finding lots of love on the other side of that.
Yeah, it's all really powerful. What were some of the books that you read that like when you started going down that path, that really opened your eyes to what's possible by learning from others?
There's a couple that I'm reading right now that I love, or one that I finished. One is called The Way of the Superior Man, which we had talked about. My buddy Jermaine Burse turned me on to it. And the trip about Jermaine is that he spoke at my recovery group once. He was a special guest speaker. We hadn't seen each other again in person until 2 weeks ago, and we're just like daily text buddies. His new book about his journey into sobriety comes out at the end of November, and he was sending me advanced copy to read. And so it's like, when people say, Mike, buy a book, this is amazing, I go to Amazon and smash the button. Another author that I really like is Morgan Harper Nichols. It's completely different, right? A lot of poetry, affirmation, and her drawings. And it's really beautiful. Young Pueblo, which is just Yung Pueblo, another author in recovery. Obviously, I've spent time every single day in the Bible working on my faith. And an author that I like came out of nowhere, my buddy Jeremiah, who you also know, it's like, Mike, you got to read Bob Goff's book, Love Does. And so I'm like, cool. And he tells this story, right? And it's like, with kind of both of our shared experiences in Austin, Tony, where I'm like, I just need to be more like my 3-year-old grandson, who just approaches life with like, everything is wonderful. I love everybody. And why wouldn't everybody love me? And so Bob Goff models this because he's this incredibly successful corporate attorney in Seattle. And they decide as a family, they're going to move down to LA. And so when it comes to getting new office space, he decides, I'm going to buy a season's pass to Disneyland and I'm going to make my office on the other side of the boat ride to Tom Sawyer Island. And so he sets up his computer on the picnic bench there every day, and that's his office. And he said, number one, pretty hard for me to be pissed off if I'm working at Disneyland. But number two, when other attorneys come visit me at my office, like it's a much different conversation than on the opposite sides of a mahogany table.
That is awesome. Oh man. Yeah, the idea about the inner child, right? You've got these grandchildren running around, you can see like the essence of them, and it does feel like a lot of what we are striving for in our parenting journey is somehow like a return to that. Yeah. So let's maybe starting more in the beginning, like before you had kids, like what were some of the things that shaped your ideas about fatherhood? Like where did that come from?
I grew up thinking that my family was really normal because like that was my experience. And I think everybody kind of, carries that to a certain extent. And honestly, when I look back, it's like I didn't really know what to expect. I just wanted to kind of be like my dad and take my sons on adventures. And I knew our life was going to look really different because we were raised up in interior Alaska. And so adventures were moose hunts and running trap lines and drift net fishing the Yukon River. We're in El Dorado Hills. So a little bit of a different environment. So, our adventures were, taking Gabe to get his haircut, but he hated getting his haircut. So I would just tell him, hey, you want to go to Taco Bell? And of every time Tony fell into the trap, and he's like, absolutely. And so we drive to Taco Bell, go right past to the haircut place, and he'd be like, I can't believe I fell for it again. But my dad was very playful, very cheerful, and I just wanted to bring that there. And I also just wanted to be really present in my son's life because my parents both had very demanding jobs in public service. And so there were some times where they weren't able to make it to my events. I just decided I'm not going to miss anything that my boys go through, which was, one of the things that like it is a source of pride for me about how I showed up for them.
Yeah. I mean, being there matters so much more than who you're being when you're being there, right? Because it really doesn't matter who you're being if you're not there. So it's a big difference. Do you recall like what it was like when your boys were born? Like what impact that had on you, what that meant to you? You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest memory, right, is Gabe's was my firstborn, and so his mom Colette needed to be induced, and they're like, here's all the days that are available. Well, looks like the only day that's open is April Fool's Day, and so you wouldn't want that. And I'm like, absolutely. Like, I want to have an April Fool. This is great. And so, of course, like, that induction went a long time. And he was born at 12:30 in the morning on April 2nd. And so the great thing about Gabe, right, is he came out coned head. He was blue. He wasn't breathing. And so they had to like slap him awake over there with that special doctor that comes in the side in case your child's like, not alive. And so he started crying and everything was really great. But it's interesting. But I remember praying the night before, he was born. And I don't think I really knew what I was praying to, but it was God. And I was out on my patio and just praying about it. And, just that first time that I held him, right? Like he was everything I could have ever wanted. Like, that feeling of connection. And especially because I was lucky enough to be in a career where I took 3 weeks off, spent those times with him. And, he was a little yellow jaundice baby, and so we had to wrap him up in that super awesome like radioactive blanket to like make him not yellow some more. And so it was just fun because that was the last time in Gabe's life that he was ever quiet. So 3 weeks after that, it was just constant noise, and still till today.
That's great. I didn't know. Good. Gabe and I have birthdays one day apart. That's pretty cool.
Are you the third, or are you actually an
I'm
April
the third.
Fool?
No,
Gotcha.
well, I am an April Fool, but born on the 3rd.
Yeah, and Jacob was very similar, although fortunately, no induction. He came out really quick. He was alive when he was born. So, and I just remember because unfortunately, his mom and I separated for good. Probably 10 weeks after he was born, and maybe my memory is a little cloudy there. But just those special times, because obviously he's nursing, and so I didn't get to have overnights with him. But how special that was at a year old when he finally had overnights with me and Gabe and my brother, and just those original memories of the four of us. There's actually let's see if this one's in my office still or not. I got to find that photo, Tony, and you've probably seen it in my office in years past, but the four of us went to go get our picture taken, at Picture People, who knows if that even exists anymore. And so, there's the four of us, and my brother never smiles. He's, shaved head, out of the military. And so for years, right, when people would ask about the picture in my office, I'd be like, oh, those are my sons, and that's my gay lover, Doug. Just my dumb jokes, right? And so when Cassie and I first met, she thought I was gay because I was like, "That's my gay lover, Doug." And but
And you're kind of
still like one
gay.
of those. Yeah, it's one of those really happy memories because the boys were really little. There's my brother with his perma scowl and me just like, duh.
What was that like? I mean, that's an experience I have no connection to at all, is raising kids by myself. Like that's a big deal.
It was really fun, really present. I couldn't have done it without my brother. We just complement each other really well, and especially in the early years when Gabe started kindergarten, it's like 3 hours, and so my brother would walk down the street, and Uncle Doug and Gabe would walk home holding hands, and just like man, like I don't know what I would have done. But the other part, you're right, is I think this was the first time in my life where I was really struggling to be present. Because as a parent, as you're well aware, you're always thinking of all the things you have to do after your kids get home from school with homework, food, their sports, their baths, everything else. And I think that was around that time where I really started experiencing anxiety and depression. The best way to say is I just couldn't enjoy the present moment. And if I draw the contrast to where I'm at now with the little boys, and it's the same for Cass too. I just remember sit on the floor with him, play trucks. Like we talked about it, it's like all your kids ever want is your time, and just for you to be just as interested in the stuff that makes them happy as they are. And that's where I went awry with my sons. Was I was busy doing all those other pieces, and certainly that might have been more possible if their mom and I was still together, but they still had a very happy home. But man, am I glad to have again the do-over, after my as I've you say about Gabe all the time, right? And Jacob, despite my best efforts to screw you guys up, you two turned out to be absolute gems.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing to think about. What did you do well? Like, what are some of the moments that you're really proud of, so that other people can hear that and seek to emulate it? And then, like, what are the parts that you feel like you fucked up, like you genuinely screwed up, like ashamed of,
Yeah.
that you learned from, that other people could learn from? So what are some of those observations you would make about your fathering experience so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the ones that really comes to mind where I turned a corner from screw up to actually getting it was, my oldest son and I are very similarly wired. He's a big personality, so am I. And when he's 14 and he's struggling, I'm like, let's just smash that struggle. And that's what I tried to do, right? So I would try to smash it, and then he'd get pissed off, and then I'd get angry, and then it'd be really awesome. But what Cassie said to me that really stuck was, what would 14-year-old Mike have
Mm.
desperately needed when he was hurting? And I thought about it, and I was like, I would want a parent that I could say, it's been a bad day, um, and to be met with, I get it. Like some days are just hard. When you're ready to talk about it, I'll be here. I care, but I want you to be able to come back when you're ready. And that was really good for Gabe. And it's something that we've practiced on a number of occasions. And the same with Jacob. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is, with my youngest son who's at college in Reno now. He had a situation at the end of his freshman year where he screwed up, and he knew I was not going to be happy about it, and so he called and he owned it. When I screwed up in college, I didn't tell my parents anything, right?
Hell
Hell
no.
no, I just figured it out. I hired an attorney and did my community service, right? But my youngest calls me and owns it. And, I was able to, in that moment, recognize what would I have needed in that moment. Of
Mm.
course, there's going to be time for sturdiness and a heavy hand. But I was so grateful that he called and owned it that I complimented him and told him how much courage it takes to come and own things and to be honest. And I guess the singular piece, right, is it's just open communication with all the kids that they can feel safe enough, even at 32, because that's Cass's oldest, and with McKenna and Maddie, who are 25 and 23. We're probably victims of them over communicating. Like, I
Mm.
didn't need to know that detail about the police. But I'm glad you shared. But it's really cool because, like, and I know you experience this too with your two, Tony. When your kids pick you and they call you, and your relationship has now transitioned from, I am the caregiver, you do what I say, to they're calling you because they're like, yeah, I just missed my dad, and you laugh. And they ask your advice, right? It's like it's a really special place where we're at right now.
Mm. What did it take for you to get to that place where you could have that level of open communication? Because you're exactly right. It's exactly what a kid needs, is the ability for you just to be open and honest about what it is. And yet there's something really prevents us from doing that as parents. Like, I don't know, like admitting failure is bad, or that's how we were raised, or something. But just what did you overcome to be able to pull that off?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a whole lot of personal work over the last 8 years, but I've been very lucky that Cassie has been an excellent role model for me in that piece. She is a great communicator, and when we met, I was a really poor communicator, and so I had a lot to learn. And I would watch her with her daughters, because they're older, and they always went ahead of what I was going to go through next. And it really gave me a pretty unique view into what was coming down the pipe. And then it was also helpful to have somebody to run my best ideas of parenting by, before I used those best ideas and screwed everything up. But honestly, COVID was a big awesome for us. Like, me and the boys in the house. I remember Gabe was like one of the first people, in any of our circles to get COVID. And so he and I got to chill for 2 hours on lockdown, right? Or 2 hours, 2 weeks, right? Because back in the day, we were like, maybe even three. And we just talked and had fun, and like just being able to hang out with my kids. And I think a lot of that resulted from For years, I was putting on the armor of what I thought other people wanted to see in me because I thought that I was worthless underneath. And that's, part of my addiction. In my sobriety, it has been about what you see is what you get. And who I am around my clients, friends, people at church, my sons, it's the same. Um, Very playful. I don't take myself too seriously, and I'm really quick to admit my faults. And I think that aspect creates a good environment of vulnerability because I remember being an insecure 17-year-old, and like that wasn't something I thought I thought there must be something wrong with me. Like it's time to power through and be more perfect. When you look at your dad as my sons maybe did and saw somebody that wasn't perfect and admitted his flaws all the time and goofed around with them and had kind of that same relationship with their friends too of being open and honest. I think that did a really good job of laying the foundation for where we are and how we communicate and relate to one another these days. I wish I had had faith in God myself so that I could have passed that gift early on to my kids. Instead, my oldest passed that on to me when he started attending youth group at 16. And that's how I found myself like even being in Celebrate Recovery. Kind of some of the more notable screw ups that I can really point to are not being there when I said I was going to be there, making a promise that I couldn't keep. There were basketball games where I was the coach and I was too hungover to make it there. Or that I was, and being awoken, like, where are you? And jumping in the car, to make it there eventually, forgetting to pick him, my oldest up at one of his high school basketball games. I think those are the ones that I know stick hardest with him. And so they've stuck hardest with me as well. And the other, piece, right, is more general, but it's parenting from a position of anger. And what I learned from Cass was, as I used to ask her, I was like, how did you just hear that from your daughter and not react and be okay? And she's like, oh, I'm fine on the outside, but inside I'm pissed.
Mm.
But when I react in anger, nothing good comes of it. So they know I'm upset. And it works really in my favor for them to sit there and think, what is mom going to do? While I'm also processing it. And so me learning that piece with my sons of not reacting in anger, but rather stepping away until I'd had a chance to calm down and then coming back, instead of blowing my stack like I used to do all the time over dumb stuff, right? Like you're late getting out of the house, we're running behind. And is that really a reason to blow my stack? And now with a 3 and 6-year-old, I'm like, they're just kids. They're just, like, oh, I forgot this. Like, I got to run back in the house. Like, it's just funny. Like, that is not something worth losing my cool over.
Yeah, that last piece is a really big one. It's like I don't know if you were raised with anger in the household, but it certainly, I don't know, it gets embedded inside of you and then you become a dad and then it just comes out of you and it's like this monster. It's like not even you that's doing it, but there's like a built-in intolerance for kids to be kids. Like
Yeah,
they're just kids. They don't know any better. But when we measure them against our adult level expectations, it's always going to create a problem. It's always going to
right.
create a breakdown. And then like who's the child? Who's being the child here? You or the one who's actually the age of a child?
Well, and right, I think you said it right. Our adult expectations. Here we are, carrying our expectations around, and now our child's behavior is now an affront to our better senses, or somehow a representation of my ability to parent really well was my son having his baseball uniform on in time to go so that we weren't late and it didn't shame me in front of the other parents. Like, I mean, so much of this stuff, right, is, it's ego driven, it's pride, it's
Mm-hmm.
control. And my oldest coping mechanism to when those would be let down and I'd feel disappointed was below my stack.
Right, which always makes things go way better. Like, what a
Heck yeah.
great
I mean,
strategy.
especially with little kids, like when they show up and their eyes are red from crying down their face, like that's a proud father moment right there.
It's an interesting. I think that's a really good observation, Mike. The idea that how our kids show up in public somehow has something to do with what other people think about us, and that we care more about what other people think about us than we do about our kids being who they want, that who they truly are. And like, it's our own insecurities, our own ego. Like, there's so many times that shows up that really gets in the way of really being the parent you want to be.
Yeah, and even as it translates and changes as our kids become adults, that rather than us being embarrassed of the action that they have and how it reflects on us, that now we feel responsible that because of a failing that I had as a parent 10 years ago and a lesson I didn't teach, that now they are screwing up, and it's somehow my fault, right? And what it does, right, is again, it's like, well, that's the dumbest thought ever. Like I understand how emotionally that's driven, but there's
Yeah.
that aspect, right, of like our kids are, human beings and they make mistakes and they make their own choices. And
Mm-hmm.
so for us to hope that our kids have all of our best qualities, but none of the bad ones is absolutely absurd because we've been modeling both sides the entire time. And then they
Yeah.
have their own traits that we don't own.
What are some of the things that you think you taught your boys, what they've learned and who they've become when you weren't trying to teach them anything? And I think there's probably like a shiny side to that and a dark side to that.
Yeah, and I'll focus really on the shiny side. One of the things that I've really just done in the last 8 years, is to turn my life into one that's focused on serving others, right? Helping out people when there's absolutely no incentive of gain, right? Monetary wise or anything else, but showing up for people when they're struggling, stepping into the void, to help somebody else up. Whether it's, my sponsees or, family members that are, disconnected by multiple relationships and just showing up for them and watching my sons model that now is some of the proudest moments that I have. Is I think both of my sons have grown up with a great sense of compassion, and they also are much better at not judging people than I was at that age. And so
Mm.
I think that with me moving more in actions of humility rather than in the pride that drove me in the early years of my life, I feel like that set both of them up better, to be more human, less judgmental, and just compassionate. And I see that in my daughters as well. Just the ability to go out of the way to help somebody else because they're a human being and they too are deserving of love. That's something that makes me really proud.
And now they're all, adults and adulting and getting more adulting. So what are real the hopes you have for them in their adulthood now that the majority of parenting responsibility is over?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I'm most grateful for, is that for almost all of them, their happiest place is when we're all home together. That our kids that live out of state, right? It's like they want to come home for Christmas and Thanksgiving because we just have fun and enjoy one another. But my hope, right, is to be the father for them that, they know that they can come to when they're hurting and struggling, because it's still going to happen, whether it's at like materially struggling or if it's emotionally struggling. And because of them watching my experience, that they feel comfortable coming there, um, and then being there to help walk them through it, right? Not because I'm going to fix it, but because I'm going to listen. And so my hope for them is that they're able to be vulnerable and to be able to let go of the rocks they carry around in their backpack, like we all do. We all pick up little things all our life, and pretty soon it's like 1,000 pounds back there. And that they would just be like, hey, Dad, just help me carry this one. And what an honor. Yeah. Give me two.
Yeah. Yeah. We can't help ourselves by picking them up, but we forget to put them down.
Yeah, we don't learn how to. And so modeling that with my kids, with my own behavior, and Cassie doing the same, like I've just seen a level of vulnerability from all of our kids recently that is just really powerful and just makes me content.
What do you hope your children remember most about you as a dad? Like in the future, when they talk about you as a dad, what do you want them to hold on to?
That I showed up, that my love for them was unconditional, and that, man, did I make them laugh their asses off.
Nice, nice. Man, a funny dad goes a long way, for sure. Yeah, for sure. All right. So, last thing I always like to ask is, knowing that these are the conversations, my intention is that these get listened to by people who are beginning their fathering journey, and they get to learn from all the wins and the losses and the successes and the mistakes and all those things. But if you knew that there were a bunch of people who are brand new dads that were listening in, like what advice would you give to them?
Don't take yourself too seriously. You're going to make mistakes as a parent. And most importantly, that as your kids grow up, let them see the real you. Our kids are way stronger than we ever give them credit for. And when we shield them from knowing what our struggles are, and there's a limit to it, right? As our kids mature, they can handle more. Our kids are not our accountability partners or our sponsors or our therapists. But when we model vulnerability and we are able to communicate with our kids honestly about our lives, our journeys, our successes, and our struggles, then it lets them know that it's okay to do the same thing with us. And the other thing that's most important for a new dad is sit on the floor. I don't care what toys are in front of you. If it's just a silly little crawling baby or a 3 and 6 year old knucklehead smashing cars together, like, let's get it. Oh, and don't forget your imagination. Like, man, I mean, kids, like, all you got to do is imagine something so simple, and they love that. And their imaginations, like, as soon as it's triggered, are going to take you in places. So dive back into that amazement of imagination and play make believe and build forts with them, and make sure you have a lot of Nerf guns. Like, lots of Nerf guns can never go wrong.
That's really great, Mike. Like what I heard in that is like when we become dads, it's like, oh shit, now it's serious. Now I have to like become an adult. But you're like, no, now's the time to like actually be a kid. Like you get to have fun being a kid.
I mean, sure, you got to be responsible. The bills have to be paid. You got to make dinner and everything else. But once all that's done, right, is remember that in the middle of that is time to really just celebrate the fact that our kids are a window back into our childhood, and we can walk through that window with them and experience just simple, fun things all over again. Looking for bugs outside, catching lizards, bringing the lizards inside and showing them to your wife. Like, why not?
That's great. Mike, my friend, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing yourself. This has just been so wonderful. I really appreciate you, and so glad we got to have this conversation.
Thanks, my brother. I appreciate you too, and just love you a ton, and it's time well spent.
I love you too, brother. Talk soon.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Dad Manual Podcast. If you liked it, please leave us a rating or subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you really liked it, please share it with a dad you love. I'm looking to grow a community of fathers who are ready to change the world, and I need your help to do that. And if you got questions or topics you want me to explore, email them to me at thedadmanual@gmail.com. I would love to answer your questions on our next episode. Until next time, I'm Tony Cooper, and this is the Dad Manual Podcast.